A lot of legalese, a lot of talk about, this word refoulement kept coming up, which is about the forcible return of refugees to a country where they're liable to be persecuted. Lord Reid set out the reasons why the case had got to the place it was. He was very, very, very keen on stressing at the very beginning that he said the court is not concerned with political debate. This is a legal decision, not getting involved in the politics of this. But there's no escaping the politics.
There's no escaping the politics whatsoever.
The government have lost on a key policy, a key pledge of Rishi Sunak to stop the boats. This is how he planned to do it.
This is a massive defeat for the government. It's very serious for Rishi Sunak. We've got a judgment now that Rwanda is not a safe country. The genuine refugees, according to the court, face a real risk of being returned to the country from which they fled. This is a really bad thing for the government, for Rishi Sunak, and a year and a half after the original policy was introduced. The question is, what on earth does he do now?
Well, and this comes up, of course, Benedict Spence, when we do get into the politics of this. The resignation letter published last night by Suella Braverman after being ousted as Home Secretary against her will. We think she stated in that letter there is no plan B, and if the government loses this Rwanda decision in the Supreme Court, Rishi Sunak doesn't have a plan. What happens next?
Well, this is what happens, isn't it, when you decide to outsource your own sort of borders policy to another country rather than actually sort of take control of it yourself. And ironically, part of the reason why it's been rejected is because Rwanda chooses to take its own destiny into its own hands and not just go along with what the international community says. Whether or not you think that's good or bad is beside the point. This was always, I suspect, going to happen. It was always going to be something that was going to have to be resolved domestically. What happens now? The UK is going to have to find an alternative system that is going to involve processing people in the UK. It's going to have to look to try to change the law. Does this government actually have the time or the gumption to do that?
I mean,
or the bandwidth.
Election next autumn.
Let's be fair.
Well,
it hasn't shown that up to.
Well, this is the interesting thing, of course, because a lot of the predictions about this by those who know rather more about the legalities of this than I think the three of us do, or claim to anyway, we're basically saying this may not be something as clear-cut as, you can't just do that, because that wasn't a ruling basically saying this policy itself is unfair. This policy itself is illegal. It's against the Human Rights Act. You can't go ahead with this policy. It wasn't on the principle. It was on, as you just said, Peter, first, the specifics of if somebody, that the processing of asylum seekers in Rwanda. I mean, God, can it be any worse than it is here in the UK already? But also the likelihood of them being returned to their home country, their country of origin, where they may face persecution, where they could face ill treatment. Now, there is every possibility that the government could now do a new deal, a new agreement with the Rwandan government to ensure that it is a safe country. They could agree that they will not send these people back to their country of origin. There's talk about sending Home Office officials over to train asylum caseworkers in Rwanda. I mean, it couldn't get any worse than that, could it? Is it likely that that will be what the sort of thing that the government will be looking to do? So basically to say, well, look, you said these specific things are wrong with the policy, Supreme Court judges. We're going to correct those things and we're going to bring an appeal back. Can they even do that?
So a number of things are possible. One, that's absolutely possible, exactly what you describe. One of the main planks of the judgment was that Rwanda had sent people back to Syria, for example, sent people back to clearly very, very dangerous countries. The other alternative is to try a different country, try Turkey, Egypt, Iraq. There have been other countries that have been asked about this, but the government is running out of time because even if the Supreme Court had said that this policy was lawful, Keir Starmer says that if he becomes Prime Minister, which let's face it looks likely, they would not continue with the policy. So they're really running out of time in terms of what to do and how quickly to do it, especially when you have a full King's Speech, lots of things the government wants to do, big focus on the economy, of course, the inflation figures today.
Well, this is the extraordinary thing today. I mean, there are so many stories we could be not just leading with today, we could just be talking pretty much only about Suella Braverman's extraordinary letter of resignation to the Prime Minister. We could talk about what events in Gaza, the Integrated Defence Forces arriving in that hospital in Gaza. But the one policy that's probably going to affect the most people right now in this country and their day-to-day lives is inflation falling to below 5% to 4.6%.
Oh, come on, Julia, that was 3 hours ago. Things have changed. Things have changed since then. Come on, things have moved on.
Old news, completely move on. Exactly. I mean, but it is really extraordinary, this Supreme Court judgment, isn't it? I mean, let's go back a little bit. It was June 22 when we had that plane sitting on the tarmac, I think it was Luton or Stansted, and then one by one those appeals went through to Strasbourg, to the court there, and human rights lawyers got involved, and one by one those migrants were taken off. December 22, the High Court ruled that the Rwanda policy was lawful. That was then appealed, and June 2023, early this year, the Court of Appeal overturned that High Court decision. Of course, even if the government had won today, the Supreme Court decision, but there's no doubt at all there'd have been a real move from all of the human rights bleeding artists, all of the the asylum groups. They would have taken this to the European Court. Then the question would be whether we get one of those pyjama late-night injunctions where you basically say, we haven't made a ruling yet, but you can't do it until we do. And the frustration with many people, which is that France, Spain, Italy, they get a ruling like that, they just ignore it, whereas we obey it.
It goes back to what I just said. When you start to outsource your policies and your laws, actually you lose control of these things. And that is, I'm afraid, I understand why lots of people are very keen on membership of the European Court of Human Rights and all these things, but it does mean that the democratic process is frustrated. It means that even if people vote for a policy, judges elsewhere that they have no say over can turn around, wag their fingers and go, can't do that. And this is, I'm afraid, where this government has fallen down on lots of things. It has been, as we always say, 13 years of Tory rule. We're still in this position where actually something that happens in Rwanda, we're now outsourcing that policy to another country. Our legal decisions, if it doesn't happen here, as you said, it would have happened in Strasbourg. We still haven't extricated ourselves from these things. And there is no real desire. We hear every now and then sort of half-hearted, maybe it might be time to leave the convention. Is it going to happen? They've had all the time in the world to do that. They would have known, actually, given Rwanda's human rights record. They're not complete idiots. They can read what Paul Kagame gets.
I mean, it's not a holiday destination for most people for a reason.
The only reason people had ever heard of Paul Kagame was because he abuses people's human rights. That's the only reason anybody in the UK would know who he was. This was something that should have been predicted. So, you just have to stay there and say, this is on the British government. They should have seen it.